Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's webinar on circular economy principles and applications in association with Hadley Property Group. I'm Emily Gabb, I'm an Associate Director at NLA, and it's great to see so many of us joining for this session this morning. For those of you that aren't familiar with NLA, we are London's built environment community, a cross-sector membership organisation for everyone committed to shaping a better city. We've over 30,000 members working across all aspects of city governance, planning, design, development, and management, spanning both public and private sectors. Across the year, NLA delivers events, research, exhibitions, and key flagship events. I'm sure some of you were with us at the London Real Estate Forum on Wednesday, and we're active all across the city. In today's webinar, we're going to explore how circular economy principles are being applied at scale during the soft strip-out phase of the former GSK headquarters in Brentford, and we'll take a closer look at how circular demolition, digital audits, and low-carbon construction are being put into practice at 980 Great West Road as part of a major redevelopment on the iconic Golden Mile, led by Hadley Property Group. I actually saw the project on Time Out's Instagram page this morning as well, so great to see that it's out and all over. There'll be plenty of opportunities to ask questions of the speakers at the end, so please do get ready to use those, and you can pop them into the Q&A function, which is just at the bottom of the screen. So this morning I'm joined by Henry Brooks Pollard, who is Assistant Development Manager, and Michael Clark, who is Design Director at Hadley Property Group, Rob Smith, who is Co-founder and Managing Director of Material Index, and Daniel Sweeney, Head of Sustainability for John F. Hunt Regeneration. So the team are going to do a presentation now. So I will hand over to Henry and Michael, who are kicking us off.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I think perhaps before we get into the detail and the guys go through the circular economy aspects, I think I'd like to give you a little bit of background about the building and the journey so far, really, because the GSK headquarters is a global HQ delivered to a specific brief for a specific business at a specific time. A time when sustainability and the circular economy were thoughts rather than actions, and certainly were not on very many people's agendas. Like any commercial office building that's only 25 years old, it's in good nick. Its internal spaces, its workforce amenities, its common areas, support accommodation and equipment is all pretty much as good as new. So at Hadley, we saw this as an opportunity to do something groundbreaking. Our vision really is to create something long-lasting and sustainable from something that clearly is neither of these things. So we wrote a new project brief for the design team. We invested 6 months of the team's time mixing a little bit of pragmatism with a whole lot of passion. What could we retain? What could we repurpose? What could we reuse? And then what could we give new life to? The route to zero carbon has to start somewhere, and the reuse approach was the team's focus. So exploring and testing the art of the possible. You've got to balance that with the embodied carbon approach, with how you create a whole new place for a whole new community. So the reuse approach looks sequentially at substructure and basement, superstructure, and existing materials. Retention at all costs is something to be avoided. Retention of basement and substructure may seem an easy win, but in reality, it's a complex, technical, challenging, and expensive direction of travel. But our retention strategy balances site capacity, placemaking, quality of homes with the embodied carbon savings made by retaining those components. With the commitment to quality, there comes a tipping point in the retention versus quality battle where you have to stop retaining. A 20th century office building, after all, was not designed to morph into a 21st century home. Its grid, its floor-to-floor dimensions, its shape, its materials are not really seen in any current residential brief. But everyone loves a trier, and we've tried again and again. The road to reuse is littered with good intentions, and programme and viability are unforgiving bedfellows on this journey. We topped out at 128 possible retention combinations. That's 128 master plan options, all from one global HQ. The challenge has been to get from 128 to one quickly, efficiently, and objectively. So we adopted an objective sustainable design framework based on a TfL model to assess the 128 options, and we got down to the 8 you see in front of us. The adopted retention and reuse option was about retaining substructure, retaining basement, but also retaining key existing superstructure components highlighted in this image, around which we asked the design team to develop a world-class master plan. So can the building retention ambition deliver a memorable new community? Can the new master plan deliver a truly sustainable community? And will the new development deliver the ambition and the vision we asked of the design team? We think the answer is yes. Here's the submitted master plan. Can you tell which bits are retained? Can you tell where the constraints of basement grid and retained superstructure are apparent? We don't think so. If the retention ambition started out as focusing on the master plan, it very soon became an influence on the architectural design as well, which happily included the emerging community opinion that the GSK Tower was not the devil incarnate, rather it was a landmark that should be recognised in the emerging design. The ambition of retention of the tower, of course, required a little bit more testing, and then some more testing. The repurposing of the tower involves cutting and carving, but also extending. We've cut back an 18-metre deep office grid to residential grids at 9 metres. We provide generous residential floors, and these have replaced its standard office fare. Reusing steel from the deconstructed HQ to add height to the tower has created a silk purse from the proverbial sow's ear. The new offer transforms a relatively uninspiring office floor into a high-quality, light, airy and desirable 21st century home, all fashioned out of some rusty old cast-offs, at which point I'll now hand over to Henry to take you through some of the detail.
Yes. So, thank you for that, Michael, and taking us through the scheme and our work through stage 0. I think as Michael has spoken through, the stage 0 work that informed our master plan was crucially important for setting the precedent and enabling us to set the project off on the right trajectory from a circular economy and reuse perspective. The soft strip itself, which obviously we're talking through today with Material Index and JF Hunt, was the first phase of the works to take place on the site. And it was where the principles that we'd look to apply to our master plan, emphasising a reuse-first approach, were going to be tangibly measured and applied on the ground. So as Michael talked through, we recognised that the building itself, being less than 25 years old, that reuse was going to be an absolute priority and requirement in what we set out to do. Organisationally, given the age of the building, this approach was the most sustainable, but also it was the most responsible thing for us to do. So on to the next slide, and integrating circular economy principles into procurement. So initially, we appointed Material Index to do a material audit of the whole building, which Rob is going to talk through in more detail later. We'd been familiar with Material Index's platform, and we were keen to make sure that themselves, working with JF Hunt, were part of the reuse solution for the soft strip process at the site. As such, what this meant that we did is we brought together JF Hunt and Material Index to best discuss the combined solution and how they could work together to deliver results for us. We held a number of workshops prior to entering into contract, where we established how this setup was going to work and ensured that we weren't going to be creating any conflicts between the two organisations. We were clear from the beginning that the GLA guidance on circular economy principles, which support the application of the waste hierarchy, which is shown here on the screen, would be followed, and that we were going to seek to better the GLA targets of 95% reuse, recycling or recovery. In terms of the collaborative partnerships with contractors and reuse networks, the initial engagement that we had with JF Hunt and Material Index allowed us to set clear standards in our contract with JF Hunt, who agreed to an obligation to reuse, recycle up to 95% of the building in their contract. Material Index acted as our independent auditor for the process to assure a level of independent review on the numbers that were being achieved from the site, where there was a clear information exchange between the two organisations. And JF Hunt could collaborate with Material Index, tracking the progress against their materials audit. Establishing reporting systems to track the circular economy progress. As part of the monitoring progress, we were really keen to get a regular update, and how we wanted this to be presented was in some form of dashboard here. I'm not going to talk through it in detail, and Rob will later on in his section of the presentation. But we just wanted a clear representation showing where the materials were going, how they were leaving the site, and tracking against the audit which Material Index had produced for us. We worked together with Material Index to produce this dashboard. It's shown here on the screen. And one of the areas that we were particularly keen to understand was where the materials were going, which was something which evolved over time and Material Index built into their dashboard for us, again, which Rob will talk through in more detail later. We also established a fortnightly sustainability working group where we'd meet on site whilst the soft strip was going on with both JF Hunt and Material Index. And what this allowed us to do was to talk through any potential upcoming challenges, and also as a bit of an information exchange between the three organisations, which was critical going throughout the contract. And it meant that one organisation could discuss with the other any potential challenges or any potential upcoming avenues where we could look to maximise reuse for the materials from the soft strip. I'm now going to hand over to Rob at Material Index to talk through this in more detail.
Great, thanks very much, Henry. Yeah, good morning, everyone. So I'm Rob Smith. I'm Managing Director at Material Index. So next few slides, I'm just going to talk briefly about what it is we do, because it's a relatively new service offering in this space, and how we've applied that on this project with Hadley Property Group. So Material Index are a team of architects, engineers, and software developers. We're based out in Clerkenwell. We're a team of about 17 people, and we work collaboratively with building owners, with contractors, with design teams to enable large-scale reuse of construction materials in the built environment. And the way we do that is by offering a suite of circular economy services. So those are pre-demolition audits, which I'll talk about. We do material reclamation audits, material passports, and we offer a material exchange and tracking service. And it's these services that come together to enable reuse rates which are well in excess of the industry standard, which is typically as low as 2 to 4%. And we like to achieve an average of around 19%. On this project, we actually were more than double that, which was great due to the concerted effort. We work across the supply chain. So yeah, developers, fit out contractors, architects, designers, government organizations, because that's sort of what's required in this circular economy. It kind of touches all sectors of the built environment. And I will skip to the next. Have I got control to skip? All right, sorry about that. So yeah, we're divided into three departments. We've got an auditing team, which is mainly made up of architects, and they are essentially surveying buildings before they're deconstructed. So the main service we offer here is a pre-demolition audit. This is something that is typically done by demolition contractors as a way of estimating how much steel, bricks, concrete, plastic is in a building. And that's traditionally done as a way of calculating how many skips they need to get rid of those materials. But recent legislation coming in from the GLA is now requiring much more detailed surveys as part of a circular economy statement. Or if a developer is going for BREEAM, or if a certain borough is just more onerous in their requirements around circular economy, a much more detailed audit is required. And that's a service that we provide. So we do a very detailed digital component level survey of the building. So we catalogue every door, every window, every light fitting, bricks, steel, concrete, everything in the building, to provide a very data-rich inventory or catalogue of what is in that building, tagged with useful information such as dimensions, volume, weight, carbon, condition, ease of disassembly. And what that does, having all that information, is it enables a really useful conversation with the professional team around the circular economy and the pathways that those materials are going to take, whether it's retain them in situ, reuse them on site in some fashion, or make them available elsewhere, or recycle them down their traditional streams. So we work really hard on producing these fast and accurate pre-demolition audits. And part of the reason we do that, I'm having a bit of trouble skipping slides for some reason. There we go. Is it facilitates the exchange service that we also offer. So we work with a number of distributed businesses that deal with secondary components. So we take that very detailed asset register, which is digitally displayed, and we use that to facilitate conversations around reuse. And we identify buyers for everything from light fittings, sanitary items, and we work all the way up to large manufacturers like SAS who take back ceiling tiles. So we deal with the whole supply chain of reuse partners. And at this point, we're working very closely with the strip out contractors. So these guys are experts on site. They know how to take a building apart, how to handle materials, and we're there providing the digital interface. So cataloging the materials and finding the buyers or the recipients for those. So 980 Great West Road was a great project for us to get involved with. Obviously, a huge scheme, loads of materials coming out of it, so a huge opportunity to sort of make these available into the secondary market. What was great for us, as Henry alluded to, is we were engaged super early in this process. Hadley Property Group had very sort of clear intentions and ambitions around reuse and the circular economy. We had a number of back and forth conversations early in the process. I remember on the phone with Henry, he was trying to kind of understand exactly what our service was, how we could support, while they decided how they would appoint us on this project. And yeah, ultimately they got us to do a pre-demolition audit, as I've explained. There's some pictures here of our team on site capturing all that data. And we also got appointed to do the material tracking, which was unique for us, and I'll talk about that afterwards. But following on from having that pre-demolition audit, once the building came up for deconstruction, we interfaced very closely with JF Hunt Regeneration, who are experts at handling big sites like this. They actually have their own good connections with resellers. So we were working side by side with them to make sure that wherever possible, materials did go for reuse. And on this project, I think there was 1,000 tons of raised modular flooring went into the reuse market. There was 88 tons of carpet tiles. It was actually so much carpet tiles coming out of this building that other sites that we were brokering elsewhere, we were struggling to broker those into the market because all the resellers were kind of saturated. So we almost flooded the market with that product at the time. The ceiling tiles, those all went back to SAS International. Ironmongery was taken by Frankie, who's doing a lot in that space at the moment. And then TV, fridges, sanitary items, those all found various pathways, as well as the sort of traditional recycling that was going on side by side with this. And so, as Henry mentioned, what we were also appointed to do on this project, which was actually a first for us, was material monitoring. So we were asked to provide an overview of not just the materials that were leaving site via reuse, but all of the materials. So everything that went for recycling and all the various pathways. It was a very clear mandate that there needed to be clear transparency on where everything was going. So we built this dashboard. We worked with JF Hunt Regeneration to collate all their data, put it into one place. And then every 2 weeks, we would sit with the management team at Hadley Property Group and feedback and just check that we were basically on the right path as we were moving through the strip out phase. And I go to the last slide. So, and then what we added to that, this was something that evolved through the project, is actually they really wanted granular data on where physically was that material ending up. So what the dashboard enables you to do is really drill down into, okay, what materials were leaving site? When did they leave site? Where did they go? How much carbon was associated with them in embodied terms and from transport? And really get that kind of transparency on all those materials leaving site. So that's a whistle-stop tour of what we did. There's obviously a lot more behind the scenes, but hopefully that gives you an overview. I guess the main takeaways for us are like early engagement is really important to get upfront information on a pre-demolition audit from us or someone similar. That really sets you up for success. I think having that clear mandate from the management level is really important because reuse, once you're on site, it can be challenging. It is hard. But having that clear directive from the top really just points everyone in the right direction. So for that reason, we found the collaboration on this project to be really great and actually just very enjoyable to do as well. Those bi-weekly meetings were great to be a part of. So I think that's important. And then finally, yeah, this monitoring aspect is becoming more and more important. It was a first for us. We've actually been appointed on other projects, including by British Land, to provide this service, because it's being recognised that it's all good saying you're going to do this, but you actually have to be able to report back and provide that transparency on the data as well. So I'm going to stop there and I'm going to hand over and I'll be available for questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Rob. So yeah, quick introduction. I'm Dan Twiney, so head of sustainability for Joiner Fund. This was, I guess, the regeneration business and Joiner Fund in general, quite an interesting project to get involved with reuse. We've been doing it for quite a while now, but not necessarily on this scale. So that came with its own challenges. I think the circular economy comes with its own challenges anyway, regardless of the scale. And some of those we find end up being determined by people's definition of the circular economy and whether they feel that the value is in, a reuse from project A to project B, or does it go off site through some form of remanufacture, or does it go off social value? So all of these different definitions kind of get muddied across different projects and portfolios. So yeah, I think you'll agree that early engagement is going to be a key theme across this panel discussion. But if you could sort of define what your definition of that circular economy is, build out your targets for the project, then I think once everyone's singing up the same hymn page, hymn sheet, you can really start to make that progress quite quickly. I think all of this then kind of eradicates the uncertainty in your time, your program logistics, and you want to be setting your benchmark early and then aiming to achieve that from day one, essentially. So over the past sort of 4 or 5 years, we've seen different iterations of the circular economy and how it looks in terms of market cycles. I think sort of that coming out of that COVID period, there was a big kick forward in terms of circular economy and sustainability. And I think that came with a lot of sort of encouragement to do the right thing, maybe less so regardless of how that's stacked financially against programs, because potentially the first person to do it, that comes with value from branding, marketing, social value, and all of that stuff. But once it kind of goes through 2, 3, 4 iterations, you kind of lose the value from doing it first, and that's where you see clients and developers looking to the contractors to find that efficiency, because it will always become commonplace, and when it does become commonplace, you need to do things efficiently and bring the maximum value back to the project. So that's where companies like Material Index would support us in that scheme to really drive the value of the materials up, while we look to harvest those materials in the most efficient way possible. And then that becomes where there's a tipping point in terms of, is something worth doing? Are we really pursuing the most sustainable practice? And if we are not, then is it best to sort of cut ties there? And maybe we look to sort of re-engage with that item in a few years once the market has caught up. So over the years, we've seen the reuse markets catch up, and as Rob mentioned, you've got companies, SAS, Frankie PLC, raised access flooring, all of those become norm, and then we're sort of still waiting for certain reuse items to sort of play catch up. So it's all about where is best to spend your energy, where could you get the certainty of the value of an item, and again, setting the target early. So if we take the sort of typical project life cycle, as a contractor, we would rarely be involved, I guess, in terms of advice or opinion on program or methods at any point before tender is released almost. So, Rob and his team may carry out that pre-demolition audit earlier and earlier, whether that is at stage 0 or 1 or 2. And then more often than not, we would see that those pre-demo audits would tick a box in terms of compliance and sit on the shelf until distributed in a tender pack. With that, there is obviously an opportunity lost because that gap between pre-demolition audit and tenders, we're obviously putting their price and program together on a lot of unknowns. So with that comes risk. With that risk comes additional cost, time, labour, and then you're still trying to figure out what you're meant to be doing while on site. So I think the difference with this project is that, as both Hadley and Robert and Mr. Linux have said, is that early engagement, brief was set very early, is sort of questions and the direction that we wanted to go forward with was set out sort of in that tender process. So, okay, we are pricing, certainty into that. So, A, we're giving value back to the client. B, we know that we're not going to be wasting time looking to harvest materials that aren't necessarily going to find a home. Because when we look at a site team and momentum in terms of reuse, if you are instructing people to do this extra work, go out of their way or do something different that, people have been doing for 20, 30 years, and then they see it in a skip at the end of that process, then it's really difficult for them to be engaged on the next project. So if we kind of focus on that highlighted grey box, typically we wouldn't get value certainty of doing an exercise until we're in the soft strip phase. And by that point, we may be going back to reprice to the client to say, actually, this is taking longer than expected, or, so it's difficult to run a project in that manner. So for this project, that value certainty of those exercises was sort of confirmed during the tender. So day one, you can make your progress, because I'm sure as everyone is aware, the day you start on site with a soft strip, that usually follows with another contractor, maybe some form of demolition or deconstruction, which is then going to be followed on by groundwork, substructure, a whole plethora of people who are dying to get on site. So your window of opportunity is squeezed from day one. So you may think that you have time, but that's rarely the case. And if you're trying to figure out what's the best reuse pathway in your little green box here, it's always going to be a difficult challenge. So I think a few points just to finish up on from our point of view is that, again, it's something that is discussed at probably every conference I've been to in the last 4 or 5 years, is that early engagement. So it's quite nice and refreshing to be involved in a project that took that on board. I know we've had many discussions with Material Index over time, and each project has its own sort of nuances in terms of how it's structured, how people are appointed, and who's responsible for what. So to have that nice and clear while we're putting together sort of our logistics and sort of sharing that with Material Index and Hadley, it made for a smoother transition between the phases. I think part of that is that we need to align our program, or we need to share our program and be quite open in terms of what that looks like in logistics when materials are available. What is sort of the cut line for when we need to have found an end user for that product, because the last thing we want to be doing is sort of double, triple handling materials and storing them as long as possible, again, just to end up sort of at a recycling facility. And then I think the GSK project made it slightly easier that the project was of such a large scale that you did have flexibility sort of in terms of storage. In a typical project, if you're looking at a commercial office in central London, you might not necessarily be graced with that. So it's quite important to sort of have all of those programs aligned. And again, just having those clear reuse pathways. So, as a contractor, you may have certain relationships with certain people, and there's definitely a lot of value in having a brokerage service that has relationships elsewhere, and just being clear about who's responsible for what. By which point do you then, if you haven't found sort of an end user in your own network, do you reach out and say to the material index, and okay, we might need some support on this item? I guess again, in that respect, the benefit from material index is that their value chain sort of focuses on bulk transactions. So the last thing you want to be doing is having sort of 50 collections for a single item when you can split that down between, maybe one business that wants to take them all. At least you know that you're dealing with a serious consumer who's going to have a good end user, and Rob touched on that in terms of where materials end up, and let's not save one thing and not necessarily it be true because of the types of people that you've been working with. And again, in terms of trying to make it sustainable and I guess beneficial long term, is that you have to make it, you have to generate value somewhere, because ultimately there may be times where there's an increase in labour or there's an increase in logistics. So ultimately the whole point of sustainability is that it needs to make sense. So that's an important point to touch on. And then again, the reuse at scale, I think at first we all thought that would be really easy because there are so many items that you can, someone is going to buy it and someone's going to take them all. But as Rob alluded to, if you saturate the market in a certain area, it's all supply and demand, at the end of the day. So if there is no demand, then you're trying to supply the market that isn't necessarily sort of open to accepting it. You might just have been unlucky with timing. So that's something that I learned on this project, to be fair. Again, early planning, if there are buyers for materials that we need to sort of adjust programming, then that might be a conversation. That's an easier conversation to have before you're on site, before you start sort of, adjusting any logistics plans and storage and all of that stuff. And again, you want to minimize the amount of material handled because of the scale of the project. If you're moving materials from one floor to another, all of that comes with time and reduces the efficiency of what you're doing. So all of that is sort of hidden costs into what you're doing and doesn't necessarily add any value to that. So yeah, efficiency is key. And I'll pass back to Henry and Michael now. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, guys. If I could quickly finish the presentation by showing you how reuse, the circular economy, and the repurposing approach is about so much more than perhaps just ceramic white goods and ceiling tiles. It's about social sustainability. It's about repurposing of undervalued space as a focal point for community. It's about revitalising existing assets through the recycling of materials. It's about creating new places around which community and place develops. And it's about handing back private corporate space to intergenerational community uses. It's about welcoming people where before you kept them out. And the final slide is about remembering that repurposing and regeneration comes in many different forms. And in 1962, that's what it looked like. Thank you.
Thanks everybody for those fantastic presentations. Great to see so much in-depth information on all of that sort of reuse element of the project. So we're going to move on to the panel discussion element of the webinar this morning. And I'd like to invite Alexandra Jonker, who is Senior Sustainability Consultant from Bureau Happold, to join the rest of our speakers for this part of the discussion. Alexandra, if we can kick off with you because you have just joined us. If you could talk us a little bit through what Bureau Happold's role is in the project and what are some of the other circular economy goals and ambitions.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Emily. So we've been on the project for the last couple project stages as well, and we're doing the circular economy work, the whole life carbon work, and leading some of the wider sustainability ambitions on the site as well, including things around the BREEAM certification that the project will be targeting. And yeah, we've been looking quite a bit at the reuse and retention story of these blocks as well, and really feeding into some of the investigations and surveys that have been required for that. So obviously the soft strip that the audience is hearing about is this really critical first step in what's going to be a much longer and wider journey. So Michael alluded to some of this already in his presentation, but a lot of initial studies and appraisals were undertaken to get to the kind of final reuse and retention decisions we have now, which included things like pile retention and capacity studies, superstructure retention, and looking at different typology conversions that were possible. Just what would that basement sharing look like? And of course, looking at the whole life carbon impact of those different scenarios and the different associated social impacts as well. And so that kind of final decision right now around the retention of the existing basement and the varying levels of sub and superstructure retention across the site really came from quite a long and involved process that really began in stage 0. And that's really the only reason it was possible. As a lot of the panelists have mentioned, like that kind of early engagement and investigation to give you stuff to build on throughout the stages is what's really required to be able to result in quite an ambitious reuse and retention scenario. We're looking at a lot of other aspects that can be reused on the site as well. A lot of these are subject to kind of further, more detailed investigation in the next project stages. But a few really exciting opportunities are the reuse of the existing steel beams on site. So the structural engineers have been looking at what of the existing steel can be reused within some of the structures of the new development itself. And so there are still investigations going on about this and further discussions, but it's a really key reuse opportunity for this scheme with potentially really good embodied carbon savings as well. There's some beautiful existing stone cladding on the site that we're looking to reuse in some of the new facades. And the actual landscape architecture design has been really led by this kind of brief to reuse as well. So looking at things like how paving materials, some of the sculptural work, some of the concrete, et cetera, can be reused within the actual landscaping design as well. So those are just some of the exciting opportunities that we're going to be looking at moving forwards, amongst some other material reuse opportunities as well. And I guess like something else the team was really keen to look at is the flexibility and adaptability of the space and the different floors as well. That's just to try to make sure that this building can have a lot of purposes in the future, that it isn't just one use kind of scenario for a lot of it. So looking at things like how easily the residential apartments can be converted into, say, student residential apartments, and making sure to keep any retail and commercial space quite open and flexible as well, so it can suit different purposes. So yeah, quite exciting. And again, a lot of this was only possible because of that early engagement and investigation that happened.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, definitely getting from you and from the presentations that early engagement piece is really kind of critical. So this is one for the Hadley team. Obviously, this is a very different way of doing things. How did you marry up sort of the costs of taking on such a large retention and retrofit approach with the cost saving that obviously you would have had if you were to go down the demolition route?
Well, it is a challenge. I mean, we're not going to pretend it's not. And that's one of the reasons that we've done so much exploratory work at the beginning of the design process, to make sure that we can marry the end values with the current costs. But it is a process which is ongoing. As Alexandra said, we've recently submitted for planning. We've taken a lot of the design kind of beyond the stage 2 level, but certainly through the next stage. The next stage of detailed design and coordination, and the reality of how we go about repurposing will be where we'll be challenged, I think, in terms of how we marry costs and values. But actually, we feel that there's an audience out there that are more than willing to pay for what they see as long-term residential community spaces and places to live. It's not a kind of a short-term plan.
And as a bit of a follow-up to that, that's also sort of a slight aside. You mentioned the sort of community benefit, and obviously during the presentation, how important was it to engage sort of with the local community during the design process?
Well, we think it's absolutely essential, and it was interesting when I referred to the perception of the GSK Tower and the GSK building as a landmark, and we were slightly nervous when we started this, that the community would see the current building as something which they had no love for, but in many respects, they've got a great deal of, not quite love, maybe is not the wrong term, but they see it as part of their kind of community and they're part of their townscape. And they were keen that we retained elements of superstructure and had some form of memory of the existing building. And that kind of thing helped us shape the brief in terms of how we appointed the design teams and asked them to take this forward, was that how could we have something which people could see as a new landmark that born out of the current building and its history in the borough.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, I suppose with the Golden Mile, there's a lot of those kind of iconic spots on the landscape, isn't there? So that's brilliant. Rob, you mentioned that this project is double your average reuse. So how have you approached projects of this scale? Have you done that in this way before, or is this quite a new thing for Material Index?
I mean, this is what we do all day long. We do reuse on buildings, but this is the biggest project we've done. Yeah, so to date, we haven't done it of this scale before. And with this sort of, I guess, upfront sort of planning and lining everything up, quite often we get brought in last minute, and it might even be weeks before the strip out's taking place, and we're brought on to see what can be reused, and that really hampers your ability to enable reuse because the momentum's already in one direction. The stakeholder management becomes a lot trickier. So I think for us, this is like an exemplar of how we would love all our projects to be brought in early, a clear alignment with all the stakeholders and just setting up for success from the start. And I think this demonstrates that when you do that, you can get, much higher than the average reuse rates that we're currently achieving elsewhere.
Brilliant, thank you. And from a Hadley perspective, what would you both say are sort of key lessons for you as a client on this type of project?
Thank you, Emily. I think we've obviously spoken through the early engagement point, and I don't think we need to discuss that again from our perspective about just how critical that was and how important it was across all three organisations. But I think also it's the ongoing discussion. So by setting up the fortnightly sustainability working group as an example, it allowed us to sort of make commercial and proactive decisions. And what that meant is that we could be incredibly reactive to what was going on the ground. And for example, if it meant that we could see that given the amount of materials that were coming out, for example, with carpet tiles or other materials that were being soft stripped, we could make a decision to say, okay, we might have a small program today, or we might need to increase the sort of storage that's taking place on the site. But what it meant is we weren't sort of chasing the works that was going on. So I think, making sure that, yes, from the beginning, there's early engagement and there's clear targets, but actually ongoing collaboration during the sort of contract itself is critical. And I think that's something that we'd look to take forward in future projects.
Great, thank you. We've got a few questions coming in on the Q&A, so I will go to those in a second. But last one from me, just sort of on this kind of collaboration piece. Has the local authority been supportive of this way of working as well?
Very much so. The local authority and the GLA and a number of other stakeholders have been very interested and very positive in terms of the approach that we've taken. If you go back to perhaps one of the positive things that we've done here was we started with a blank sheet of paper and we got everyone in a room from the local stakeholders, the local authority, from the planning teams to talk about ambition, to talk about hopes for the site, and got everybody to kind of buy into what our ambition was and therefore support it from the outset. I think that's been massively important. The council have been with us every step of the way. Local stakeholders have been involved in the whole design process, and I think have all embraced the collaborative approach in a very positive way. So I think we're very happy with what has been 2 years of incredibly hard work, but incredibly rewarding because everyone's been involved.
Fantastic. Okay, let's see what we've got in the Q&A, and obviously feel free to jump in, one of you, all of you, whoever feels most appropriate. So first question here, do you think revoking of the site waste management plan regulations, which happened a few years back, has resulted in improvements in waste recovery or not? So I think, Rob and Dan, that's probably one for the two of you initially.
Yeah, I mean, I think certain requirements can quite easily become sort of a tick box exercise, and that very much felt like it was for a period of time. I don't think that the purpose of the targets in those were particularly challenging. I think what we see now in terms of circular economy statements and obviously local council and GLA targets, that they're becoming a bit more ambitious, a bit more challenging. There are still issues because, again, as I mentioned, the definition of what reuse is. So sometimes you might see projects where you're forcing reuse where you may not be, or there are, on the other end of that scale, quite ambiguous targets that might allow a sort of get out of jail free card if you can't necessarily achieve it. So again, on this project, if you set the target, allow your contractors to price accordingly, and everyone's sort of on that page, then yeah. So I don't think it's necessarily had a huge impact. I think the sort of circular economy statements and the GLA have had, and the planning process have probably had more of an impact than necessarily just revoking the site waste management plan.
Rob, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think Dan's covered it off well. I mean, yeah, I think the pre-demolition audits are maybe coming in to sort of take the place of what the intention of a site waste management plan used to do, is my kind of interpretation of it.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm jumping around these a little bit, but what is the balance of scope between the work that Material Index carrying out versus the circular economy appointment that Bureau Happold have, and how do you all work together?
Do you want me to start, Rob? Yeah, we've worked on a few projects together now, actually. It's quite a good collaboration that I think we have. So Material Index is able to give us a lot of the detail in terms of what is in the existing buildings, kind of what is the quality of it, what are some of the potential avenues for it to be diverted from landfill, how much reuse, recycling, et cetera, is available. And I guess what Bureau Happold really adds is the kind of technical rigor to be able to look at it with the design team and see what can actually be incorporated into the design, working with the architects, the structural engineers, and the wider design team. And what we're really able to do is kind of provide really a check on all of the work that's happening and to try to make sure it's carried through the end using tools like the Material Index platform, but also things like the GLA circular economy template and some of the other reporting that we do with the design teams as well. So it's really helpful, I think, to have them kind of as a supporter, really working collaboratively and both being able to push a lot of the same ambitions, right? In terms of, I think both of us are really trying to push as much reuse as possible, whether it's on-site and off-site. So I think in that sense, yeah, it's a very good partnership and why we're able to do a lot of this work.
Yeah, I guess from our perspective, like we're a relatively new company, right? And we've come into what's a growing sector in this industry, and I guess we've sort of found a nice niche in it where we operate, and everyone is sort of finding their feet around that. So we kind of interface, yeah, with the sustainability consultants, and we interface with the demo contractors, and there's overlap in all those as well. But I think we've done enough projects now that everyone is kind of figuring out where we all sit, and there is definitely, we found that this niche around providing that very granular like data on what's in a building, because a lot of the data on what's in a building gets lost throughout the life of it. So providing that like prior to the strip out happening, providing that information, having a dedicated team that are reaching out to these resellers, interfacing with the demo guys. That's how the kind of interface works, and then getting the technical expertise coming in from the sustainability consultants. It seems to be gelling together quite well, but I would, caveat with the fact that we are at the foothills of this. Like there's a long way to go. Like it's all heading in the right direction, but we really are at the foothills in this industry of where we need to get to with reuse, I would say. But this is definitely one in the right direction.
Great, thank you. How was the early contractor involvement managed? Was this a pre-construction services agreement or similar?
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's one for us. In terms of the early engagement with the contractor, it was just managed during the tender process. So we were really specific in terms of the questions that we asked as part of the tender and what we were looking to receive. And we wanted to make sure that there was case studies, examples, and sort of evidence in there about how JF Hunt and others were going to work with Material Index. I think as we were getting towards the end of the tender, how it evolved was just a kind of informal workshop setting. So there wasn't particular agreements. It was more just we got together to workshop exactly how it was going to work and make sure that we'd ironed everything out sort of pre-contract stage. And I think for us, and I think for Material Index and JF Hunt as well, that was really critical just to make sure that there was complete clarity in terms of how everyone was going to work.
Great, thank you.
Just a very quick point, because it's a bit of a bugbear is that people talk about early engagement, but then it becomes a very formal exercise in terms of PTSAs and contracts, and I think people get a bit nervous around that. There are willing people in the industry as a whole, and I think if you take that formality out of it and you have the conversations or workshops that there are people willing, and you might have a bit more success in getting that early engagement if you do it that way.
Great, thank you. Do you all think that this sort of level of upfront work is going to become an industry standard for sort of major schemes like this?
I think it must do. I think the way that the sustainability agenda, we no longer can pay lip service to it. It's absolutely embedded in design. The circular economy is with us. It's no longer, again, a pipe dream. It's happening. And that can only all come together at the beginning of the project, where there's perhaps an early investment, both of people's time and efforts to understand. We talked about the art of the possible earlier on. What can we actually do here, and how best can we recycle, reuse, and repurpose? You can only do that with everybody in the room at the start of the process, rather than designing and then trying to backfill or reverse engineer the repurposing approach, the sustainability approach. So I think it's here to stay for sure.
Yeah, and I think to add to what Michael said there is clearly from this project it drives results. So I think we definitely would hope to see that it's something that does continue.
I think it's also worth mentioning that it does get easier over time. So when you do the project the first time with the high ambitions and whatnot, you do learn from it and you can apply that on future projects as well. So yeah, I think it will become standard and just kind of an easier way of doing things as well. It's built into processes.
Yeah, I would say just from what we're seeing, we stay pretty close to the legislation because our audits feed into that. And I think if you look at the legislation that's coming out, like the City of London with their retrofit first approach, they are kind of leading the charge in Westminster, and that's disseminating out. I was at the London Real Estate Forum yesterday and spent a lot of time with the local authorities there, and they are all looking to those two boroughs for what they should be implementing. When I go up to Liverpool, Manchester, similar up there, I think this will just spread out across the country. This requirement around circular economy and upfront planning around it.
Great, thank you. So another question we've got here: how long did you stay in stage 0 ahead of master plan design? Can't have been a quick process. And I think I remember you saying, was it 128 possible master plan options?
Yeah, that's we gave up counting at that point. We were 6 months essentially in stage 0. So we started off with a couple of days of workshops, visioning what it was we wanted to collectively achieve. And we invited industry leaders, we invited the council and stakeholders. And that was the beginning of writing the brief. And it was long before anyone started putting pen to paper, was what was the brief and what was the art of the possible. As I said, it's only a building that's 20 years old. It's a commercial office building. It's not residential. How do we make that silk purse? And that can only be done with that level of ambition. And I mean, collaboration is an oft-used term, but that's kind of what it was. It was everybody in the room setting out what they thought was achievable, what was an ambition, and how do we get there collectively, and bringing everyone into that discussion allowed us over the course of 6 months to write a brief that we knew we could deliver to. But it's a long time before the architects got the chance to get their felt pens out. And I think, that's a leap of faith on our part to get everybody to kind of hold back until they know exactly what that first line on the paper is, because it's based upon all that stage 0 work.
Thank you. We've another one here. What TfL document did you use to reduce to the selected option?
There's a TfL, I can't remember the exact name of it, but it was a document that allowed us to analyse and value in terms of quality the design process. So it was something which allowed us to stand back and be objective about how you measured quality, how you measured daylight sunlight, how you measured placemaking, capacity, amenity. So there's a whole raft of kind of yardsticks against which you essentially measure the quality of the master plan as it evolves. And it was taken from a TfL development framework document, because we didn't want to write something ourselves, because then that would be sort of seen as being subjective as opposed to objective. We want to take something which the GLA and others were familiar with.
And the person who asked this question has just followed up with, was it the Sustainable Development Framework?
That's the one.
There we go. Brilliant. Okay, we've still got time for another couple of questions. So in terms of overall construction cost, does this approach increase the build cost? Is it about doing the right thing but being asked to advise the client?
Well, I think the answer is it's. I said previously, it's not cheap. It's not the easiest way of doing things. It takes time and it takes perhaps more money, but we've made a commitment to delivering in accordance with that as a starting point, and that is a process, and that's part of the ambition. And what will the value be in the end? Well, we're not going to be on site, and we're not going to be selling or bringing stuff to the market for a few years yet. Numbers move over time. At the moment, it's perhaps a little bit. I mean, the economy and the delivery cycle is perhaps in the doldrums, so maybe now's not the right time to be comparing value with cost. But we do see that there's an upturn, and there's I suppose additional value to doing what we're doing because of the way that people and the community see the value of retention and reuse.
And then last couple, how important for the purposes of credible reporting is it to retain an independent auditor? And is that important to sort of your investors on the project?
I think it's definitely an important process. I think JF Hunt themselves have, as I sort of think Daniel alluded to at the beginning, they have been doing this for a while, and they do reuse reporting. I think what was beneficial in terms of having an independent auditor there is it just gives a bit of distance between the information that we're getting and a bit of ability to fact check what's coming through. I think in terms of investor reporting, again, it's incredibly useful, particularly with the dashboard that was produced on this project, because it's a snapshot and a summary which gives you a sort of clear direction of travel in a really presentable manner. So I think, yeah, it's been a useful approach.
Thank you. And then final point from everybody, we'll do like a quick fire round. What's one thing that you'd like people to take away from the conversation this morning?
I don't want to say early engagement, but it might end up being that. And yeah, just take the formality out. I think everyone's learned enough lessons over the past 5, 6, 7 years that we don't need to be repeating that on sort of every new project. So there's a lot of experience out there, and try and grab hold of some of it.
I think for me, I would say, look, when you go away back to your, whatever disciplines you work in and you propose reuse, you will get some pushback for various reasons, that it is more challenging, it's more hard. And I think the takeaway I would advocate is that it can be done. This is a direction of travel. It takes a concerted effort. We are at the foothills. We're at the start of a journey here. It will become easier. It will make sense financially. It does in many instances. So I would say just bear that in mind when you take this to conversations you're having in your day-to-day jobs.
Yeah, I think to add on what Rob said there is absolutely it is possible. And I think it's about bringing the right people together. And it's been a really fantastic experience for Hadley at an organisational level, working with JF Hung, Material Index, Bureau Happold. So yeah, I think it's just that it is possible. It's not without its challenges, but yeah, it's about bringing a good team together and working through those challenges as they come.
I also think we should be celebrating the narrative and the outcome. I think there's a fantastic story to be told through this process, and you end up with a fantastic result to present to planning authorities, stakeholders, and communities, because the design has been born out of something that they were used to and something they were comfortable with, something that they recognised, and therefore it's got a little bit of the place, the context, and the history in it. And I think that's a great story to be told.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add on is, yeah, just to be asking for it in briefs if it's not there already. And even if someone says no or whatnot, then you've at least taken that step. I think we all need to take a bit more responsibility for trying to push these kind of ambitions and targets on different projects. So.
Amazing. Thank you so much, everybody. That's all we've got time for this morning. So thank you all for your contributions today and for everyone who tuned in. Do make sure to look at the NLA website for all of our upcoming events, research and other activities. And if you're not already, you can become a member of NLA for as little as £20 a month and be part of the conversation. We'll now have a short poll up on the screen for the audiences to leave feedback. So please do make sure to do that before you log out. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your Friday and have a lovely weekend.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.